Once I stopped assuming that disrespect was accidental, everything became easier to see. Not louder, not obvious, just clearer. The kind of clarity you only get when you stop explaining other people's behavior and start observing it for what it really is. It happened at my son's retirement party. Belmore. Private room. Soft lighting. Crystal glasses catching just enough gold to make everything feel more expensive than it needed to be. 40 people. Maybe more. Investors, colleagues, friends who suddenly felt closer than family. I arrived 10 minutes early. Not because I needed to be, but because I've always believed you see more when you're not being watched yet. Marcus spotted me first. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That was new. Subtle. Easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. "Mom, you made it," he said. Vanessa didn't stand. She didn't need to. She gave me a quick glance, then went back to her glass like I was part of the room, not someone entering it. That was fine. I didn't come there for recognition. I came with an envelope. Plain. Off-white. No branding. No weight that would suggest anything important inside. I placed it gently in front of Marcus when the moment felt right. Not too early. Not when people were watching too closely. Timing matters more than presentation. "For you," I said. He picked it up, turned it once. Noticed the lack of anything impressive on the outside. No logo. No handwritten note. Nothing that would elevate it in a room like that. That was all Vanessa needed. She leaned in slightly. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough to read the room before speaking into it. "What is it?" she asked, already smiling. Marcus opened it halfway. Not fully. Just enough to glance at the first page. That was when she reached over, took it from his hand without asking, and skimmed it in 2 seconds flat. Then she laughed. Not loud. Not dramatic. Controlled. "Oh, it's just paperwork," she said. "Some old property thing." A few people at the table chuckled. Not because it was funny. Because she made it safe to laugh. Marcus didn't defend it. He didn't even read it properly. He pushed the envelope back toward me with 2 fingers. Lightly. Like it didn't matter. Like it wasn't worth holding onto for another second. "Mom, you didn't have to bring anything," he said. That line always sounds polite. It wasn't. Because he didn't say thank you. He said, "You didn't have to." There's a difference. The room moved on almost immediately. Conversations shifted. Glasses lifted. Laughter reset itself like nothing had happened. But something had. And it wasn't the humiliation. I've been underestimated before. That doesn't stay with you after a certain age. What stayed with me was how quickly they dismissed something they didn't understand. How confidently they reduced it without reading it. That kind of confidence doesn't come from ignorance. It comes from assumption. An assumption, when it's that strong, usually means one thing. They believed they already knew everything that mattered. About me. About what I could give. About what I could possibly have. So I didn't react. I didn't correct Vanessa. I didn't ask Marcus to read it again. I didn't explain what was inside. Because in that moment, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. This wasn't just distance. This was misjudgment built over years. And misjudgment like that doesn't just affect how people treat you. It affects what they're willing to overlook. I sat there for another 20 minutes. Smiled when appropriate. Nodded when spoken to. Watched how Vanessa guided conversations. How Marcus deferred without noticing he was doing it. How certain topics were avoided without anyone needing to say why. Patterns. Small ones. But consistent. By the time I left, the envelope was still in my purse. Exactly where it had been before I handed it to him. Untouched. Unread. On the drive home, I replayed the moment once. Not the laughter. Not the way the table reacted. The hesitation. The half-second pause before Vanessa called it just paperwork. That wasn't confidence. That was recognition of something she didn't expect to see. And that was the moment everything shifted. Because whatever she saw in those 2 seconds, she understood something Marcus didn't. And I knew, without needing to prove it yet, that envelope wasn't what they thought it was. It was something they had just made a mistake ignoring. I didn't go back inside after that night. Not because I was upset. Not because I needed space. Because I needed clarity. When you spend years building something quietly, you learn one thing very early. People don't ignore value by accident. They ignore it because they've already decided it doesn't exist. And once someone reaches that point, you don't correct them with words. You observe what else they're getting wrong. The drive home was quiet. No music. No calls. Just the road and a single thought repeating itself in different forms. They didn't read it. Not properly. Not even enough to understand what it was. And that meant one of 2 things. Either they truly believed I had nothing left to offer, or they were too comfortable assuming they already knew everything that mattered. Both are dangerous, but only one explains confidence. I've been a cook for most of my life. 41 years in kitchens where no one asks what you own, only what you can produce. Early mornings, late nights, heat that doesn't leave your skin even after you step outside. That kind of work teaches you discipline, not just in what you do, but in what you don't say. I never corrected people when they assumed I was struggling. I never explained why I didn't spend like others did. I never felt the need to prove anything I hadn't finished building yet. Because the truth is simple. If you explain your value too early, people build expectations around it. If you stay quiet, they reveal how they really see you. And that matters more. 34 years ago, I bought my first property. Small, not impressive. The kind of place most people would walk past without noticing. I didn't buy it to live in. I bought it because I understood something most people ignore. Value doesn't announce itself. It builds in places people don't look. From there, it wasn't fast. It wasn't dramatic. It was consistent. One property at a time. Careful decisions. No debt I couldn't control. No risk I didn't understand completely. While other people upgraded lifestyles, I expanded assets. While they spent to show progress, I reinvested to create it. Years passed like that. Quietly. By the time Marcus finished college, I already had enough to stop working if I wanted to. I didn't. Because stopping wasn't the goal. Stability was. And stability doesn't come from what you have. It comes from how predictable your income is, without needing attention to maintain it. Marcus never asked. Not once. He saw me in a kitchen and decided that was the full picture. That's not his fault entirely. People see what fits their expectations. And I allowed that expectation to exist. Because it kept things simple. Vanessa, on the other hand, was different. She didn't grow up around me. She didn't watch the years it took to build anything real. She met me when everything already looked quiet, controlled, stable. And people like that don't interpret silence the same way. They interpret it as absence. From the beginning, she was polite. Always polite. But there's a difference between politeness and respect. Politeness is surface level. Respect changes behavior. She never asked about my work. Never showed interest in anything outside what was visible. Never used mom. Always Dorothy. Small things. But patterns are built from small things. At first, I thought it was just distance. Different backgrounds. Different priorities. But over time, something else became clear. She wasn't just uninterested. She was evaluating. Watching how Marcus interacted with me. What I contributed. What I didn't. And slowly, without saying it directly, she shaped the way he saw things too. Not aggressively. Carefully. A comment here. A suggestion there. A shift in tone when certain topics came up. That's how influence works when it's done well. You don't force change. You guide it until it feels natural. By the time Marcus decided to retire, everything about his life had accelerated. Income, lifestyle, decisions. Too fast. At the time, I told myself it was success. That he had found opportunities one didn't understand. But that night, at the table, something didn't match. The way he dismissed the envelope. The way Vanessa reacted before he did. The confidence in her voice when she called it just paperwork. That wasn't someone guessing. That was someone making a judgment based on what they thought they already knew. And that's when a different thought replaced everything else. What else are they assuming that isn't true? I didn't need to confront them to answer that. I needed to verify it. The next morning, I didn't call Marcus. I called Patricia. She's been my lawyer for years. Not because I needed constant legal support, but because when you build something long-term, you don't wait until there's a problem to involve someone who understands structure. I need you to look into something, I told her. No emotion, no explanation, just direction. A company. VG Lifestyle Consulting. There was a pause. Not long. Just enough to register that the name wasn't unfamiliar. Give me a day, she said. That was all I needed. Because at that point, I wasn't reacting to what happened at that table anymore. I was following the one detail that didn't belong. And if there's one thing I've learned after decades of building quietly, it's that the smallest detail that doesn't fit is usually the one that leads to everything else. I did not have to wait long. Patricia called me back the next afternoon. Not late. Not rushed. Just precise. That is how she always works. I found something, she said. No build-up. No hesitation. That tone matters. Because when someone like her skips context and goes straight to information, it usually means one thing. The situation is not theoretical anymore. What is it? I asked. VG Lifestyle Consulting is registered as a financial advisory firm, she said. But it's not operating like one. I didn't respond right away. Not because I was surprised, but because I needed to hear how she would define that difference. In what way? I asked. Another short pause. Papers moving on her end. They position themselves as consultants for early retirement planning, high-yield strategies, alternative investments. They target clients who have some assets, but not enough experience to evaluate risk properly. That alone wasn't illegal, but it wasn't what concerned me. And I asked. There are complaints, she said. Nothing finalized yet, but enough to establish a pattern. Pattern. That word again. What kind of complaints? Misrepresentation, incomplete disclosures, funds routed through third-party structures that aren't clearly explained to clients. I leaned back in my chair, not reacting, just aligning what I was hearing with what I already knew. And Marcus? I asked. He's listed as a partner, she said. Not just an employee, a partner. That changed the structure immediately. Employees can be misled. Partners are responsible. I didn't say that out loud. I didn't need to. And Vanessa? She's not listed directly, Patricia said. But her name appears in internal documents tied to strategy planning. Not visible, but present. That fit. She never positioned herself in ways that could be traced easily. She operated in influence, not exposure. What does this mean? I asked. Patricia didn't answer immediately, because that question doesn't have a simple answer. It means, she said carefully, that if there is an investigation, your son is not on the outside of it. Not outside. That was enough. After the call ended, I didn't move right away. I sat there, looking at nothing in particular, letting the information settle into place. This wasn't about the envelope anymore. That moment at the party wasn't the cause. It was the signal. The point where something that had been building quietly became visible, just enough to notice if you were paying attention. Marcus hadn't built his lifestyle on my system. He had built it on something else entirely. And whatever that was, it wasn't stable. I replayed the last few years differently after that. Not emotionally, structurally. The sudden shift in his income. The early retirement decision that didn't align with his experience level. The speed at which everything escalated. None of that happens without a source. And sources leave patterns. Vanessa's role became clearer the more I thought about it. She didn't just marry into Marcus's life. She reshaped it. Not aggressively. Not in ways that would trigger resistance. Gradually, she introduced new ideas, new strategies, new expectations about what success should look like and how quickly it should happen. And Marcus followed. Not because he was careless. Because he trusted the direction he was being given. That's how most people end up in situations like this. Not through bad intent. Through misplaced confidence. The next step wasn't to call him. It wasn't to warn him. Because warnings only work when someone is ready to hear them. And Marcus wasn't. He had already committed to a version of reality where everything made sense. If I challenged that directly, he would defend it. Not because it was correct, but because it was his. So I didn't challenge him. I expanded the scope. I asked Patricia to go deeper. Follow the money, I said. Not just the company. Not just the complaints. Everything. Where it came from. Where it moved. What it connected to. Because if there's one thing I've learned from decades of building slowly, it's that legitimate systems are transparent when you look closely enough. And the ones that aren't start to reveal themselves the moment you trace how they actually work. That night, I opened my own records. Every account, every property, every structure I had built over the years. Not because they were directly connected, but because I needed to understand exactly what was at risk. Not emotionally, structurally. If something happened, if an investigation expanded, if Marcus's name became part of something larger, I needed to know where the boundaries were. What could be touched? What couldn't? Because at that point, this wasn't just about what he had done. It was about what could happen next. And if I was going to step in at any point, it wouldn't be to argue. It would be to control the outcome before it reached a point where control was no longer possible. I didn't contact Marcus after that. Not because I didn't care. Because I understood something most people ignore. If someone is already committed to a version of reality that benefits them, confronting it directly doesn't correct it. It hardens it. So I didn't confront. I observed. Patricia kept working in the background. Quietly. The way things should be handled when the goal is clarity, not reaction. 2 days later, she called again. Earlier than I expected. That pattern we talked about, she said. It's wider than I thought. I didn't interrupt. Because when someone like her adjusts their own assessment, it means the situation has moved from concerning to structured. Explain, I said. There are multiple layers, she continued. VG lifestyle isn't operating alone. There are secondary entities connected to it. Shell structures. Different names, different states. They don't hold assets long. They move them. Move them. Not invest. Not manage. Move. That's not advisory, I said. No, she replied. It's not. That was the moment the situation shifted again. Up until then, there was still room for misjudgment, poor decisions, even negligence. But structured movement of funds through layered entities, that requires intent. And Marcus? I asked. He signs off on client onboarding, she said. He's not just involved. He's part of the entry point. Entry point. That meant he wasn't just inside the system. He was how others got pulled into it. I didn't react immediately, because reaction would have been about him. And this was no longer just about him. And Vanessa? She's tied to the operational side, Patricia said. Strategy, positioning, messaging. She doesn't appear on the surface, but everything leads back to her influence. That matched exactly what I had seen over the years. Not visible, but directing. Not exposed, but shaping outcomes. How exposed are they? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. Not yet fully, she said. But there are preliminary inquiries. If they escalate, it won't stay contained. That was the line that mattered. Not yet, meaning it was coming. And when it did, it wouldn't be selective. It would expand. I ended the call shortly after that. Not because there was nothing more to say, but because I had everything I needed to make the next decision. I went back to the envelope that night. Still in my bag. Still sealed exactly the way it had been when Marcus pushed it back across the table. I opened it. Slowly. Not because I needed to read it again, but because I needed to look at it differently now. Inside was the transfer agreement. Fenmore Properties. A building that had taken me 11 years to fully stabilize. Not just purchase. Stabilize. $2.1 million in value. Consistent rental income. Zero debt. It wasn't just a gift. It was security. Long-term. Predictable. Independent of anything Marcus was currently tied to. And he had dismissed it without reading it. That part didn't bother me anymore. What mattered was timing. If what Patricia found continued to develop. If Marcus's name became part of something larger. Anything connected to him could be reviewed. Questioned. Frozen. That included transfers. That included ownership changes. That included anything that looked like it was moved after the fact. Which meant one thing. If I left Fenmore in that envelope, if I pushed it back to him now, it wouldn't protect him. It would expose him further. I closed the document and placed it back inside. Then I locked it away. Not out of hesitation. Out of control. Because at that point, the situation wasn't about giving anymore. It was about timing what I did next so that it didn't make things worse. The next morning, I didn't call Marcus. I didn't ask for a meeting. I didn't warn him. Instead, I did something that most people wouldn't consider until it was too late. I reviewed everything I had built and everything that could be touched if this situation expanded. Every property, every account, every legal structure tied to my name. Not because I expected it to be targeted, but because I needed to know exactly where the boundaries were before anyone else started drawing them for me. That is the difference between reacting and preparing. By the end of the day, one thing was clear. Marcus wasn't just at risk of losing money. He was at risk of losing control over everything he thought he had built. And if I stepped in the wrong way, I wouldn't just fail to help him. I would make sure he went down with it. So I didn't step in. Not yet. Because the only way to handle something like this is to understand the full structure before you decide where to apply pressure. I didn't move immediately after that. Not because I didn't know what to do. Because timing matters more than action. If you step in too early, you interrupt the pattern before you understand it. If you wait too long, the pattern finishes without you. I needed the space in between. Patricia continued digging. Quietly. No alerts. No signals that anything had changed. That part was important. Because if Vanessa was involved the way it appeared, she wasn't the kind of person who made careless mistakes. She adjusted. And the moment she sensed pressure, everything would shift. 3 days later, Patricia called again. This time, there was no pause before she spoke. I have confirmation, she said. I didn't ask what she meant. I let her define it. Funds are being routed through intermediary accounts tied to VG lifestyle clients. They're not being invested directly. They're being moved into layered entities, then redistributed. Redistributed? Where? I asked. Some go back into controlled portfolios. Others don't come back at all. That was enough. That meant the system wasn't just inefficient. It was extractive. And Marcus? He's authorizing initial placement, she said. Client trust goes through him first. So the entry point was real. Clients trusted him. And that trust was being used to move money into structures they didn't understand. That's how systems like this sustain themselves. Not through force. Through confidence. And Vanessa? She's linked to the structuring side, Patricia said. Messaging, positioning, how the model is presented to clients. She isn't visible in transactions, but the strategy reflects her involvement. Of course it did. She was never the one holding the account. She was the one designing how people believed in it. I stood there for a moment after the call ended. Not thinking, just aligning everything I had seen with everything I now knew. The party, the envelope, the way she dismissed it, the half-second pause before she spoke. That wasn't confusion. That was recognition. She didn't need to read the full document to understand what it represented. She understood enough to categorize it. And she chose to dismiss it anyway. Not because it was insignificant, because it didn't fit the structure she was controlling. That was the mistake. Not the insult. The assumption. I went back to my records that night. Not out of concern, but out of necessity. Every property I owned was held. Cleanly. No shared structures. No joint control. Everything built to operate independently. That decision, made years ago, was the reason I could move now without hesitation. Because nothing I had built depended on Marcus. Which meant I could separate from his situation completely. Or, I could choose to step in. But stepping in doesn't mean intervening emotionally. It means positioning yourself where your action changes the outcome. And for that, I needed one more piece. How exposed are they legally? I asked Patricia later that night. There was a short delay before she answered. Not formally charged, she said. But there are inquiries. If one client escalates, it could trigger a broader review. Timeline. Unpredictable. Could be weeks. Could be months. That window mattered. Because it meant I wasn't reacting to an event. I was acting before one. The next morning, I made a decision. Not to confront Marcus. Not to accuse Vanessa. To remove leverage. I pulled the Finmore transfer entirely. Not just delayed it. Removed it from any path that connected to him. If an investigation expanded, there would be nothing under his name that could be questioned or frozen from my side. That was step one. Step two was control of location. Most people don't think about where conversations happen. They think about what is said. But where you say something determines who has control. At Belmore, that night, Vanessa controlled the room. The tone, the reaction, the narrative. That would not happen again. So I chose a different setting. My office. DG Properties. Neutral on the surface. Controlled in reality. Everything documented. Everything structured. No audience. No performance. Just information. I called Marcus that afternoon. Not urgent. Not emotional. Can you come by tomorrow? I asked. You and Vanessa. A pause. Is everything okay? He asked. Yes, I said. Because it was. At least for me. For him. That depended on what happened next. I just want to go over something important, I added. He agreed. Easily. That told me everything I needed to know. He still believed he was in control. And Vanessa, she would come because she always needed to understand the structure. Before anyone else did. That was the pattern. And this time, I was the one setting it. I didn't prepare for that meeting the way most people would. No speeches. No rehearsed lines. No attempt to control how they would feel when they walked in. Because emotion is unpredictable. Structure isn't. That's what I focused on. I went through every document one more time that night. Not to confirm what I already knew, but to decide the order. Order matters. If you present information too early, it gets dismissed. If you wait too long, it becomes irrelevant. The sequence determines whether people understand or resist. Finmore stayed locked. The transfer document remained in my safe, no longer something I was offering, but something I was holding. Patricia finalized the files we would need. Not everything she had found, just enough to establish clarity. Client complaints, entity connections, signature authority, facts that couldn't be explained away without effort. I didn't want to overwhelm them. I wanted them to recognize the structure themselves. That's how acceptance works. The next morning, I arrived at DG Properties before anyone else. Same as always. The office wasn't designed to impress. It wasn't supposed to be. Clean lines. Neutral colors. Everything positioned for function, not appearance. There's no room for performance in a place like that. That was intentional. I sat at the main table and placed 3 folders in front of me. One for Marcus, one for Vanessa, one for myself. Each identical on the outside. Inside, structured differently. Because they weren't walking into the same conversation. Marcus arrived first. He always does when he thinks something is important. That hasn't changed. He walked in without hesitation, but I could see it in the way he held himself. Slightly tighter than usual. More alert. "Mom," he said, looking around briefly. "What's this about?" "Sit," I told him. No explanation yet. He didn't argue. He took the seat across from me, glanced at the folder in front of him, but didn't open it. That was expected. He was waiting for context. Vanessa arrived 7 minutes later. Not early, not late. Timed. She walked in composed, controlled, scanning the room before settling her attention on me. Then the folders. Then Marcus. In that order. She understood immediately that this wasn't casual. "What's going on?" she asked, taking her seat. Same question. Different tone. Marcus was asking for information. Vanessa was assessing control. I let the silence sit for a moment. Not to create tension, but to remove noise. When people rush to fill silence, they reveal what they're trying to manage. Vanessa didn't rush. That told me she was already adjusting. "Before we start," I said, "I want you to look at what's in front of you." Simple instruction. No explanation. Marcus opened his folder first. He flipped through the first page quickly. Then the second. His pace slowed on the third. That's where the pattern starts to become visible. Vanessa didn't open hers immediately. She watched Marcus first. Always. Then she opened it. Not scanning. Reading. Carefully. That was the difference between them. Marcus was reacting to information. Vanessa was processing structure. I didn't speak while they read. Because anything I said would become something they could push against. Facts don't argue. They sit. And they wait. After a minute, Marcus looked up. "What is this?" he asked. His voice wasn't defensive yet. Just confused. Vanessa didn't look up. Not yet. She was still on the same page. Which meant she had found what mattered. "Keep reading," I said. No explanation. Marcus looked back down. This time, slower. More careful. That's when it started to shift for him. You can see it when someone moves from reading to recognizing. Vanessa closed her folder before he did. That was the first real signal. She placed her hand on top of it. Fingers still, expression controlled. But something had changed. Not on the surface. Under it. "This is incomplete," she said. Not denial. Reframing. That's how you protect control when facts start to move against you. "It's enough," I said. Marcus looked between us. "Enough for what?" he asked. And that was the moment the conversation finally reached the point it had been building toward. Not the envelope. Not the party. Not the assumption. This. The structure. And whether they were ready. To see it for what it actually was. I didn't answer Marcus right away. Not because I didn't have an answer. Because the moment someone asks, "Enough for what?" they're not asking for information. They're asking for direction. And direction only works when the person is ready to follow it. Marcus wasn't there yet. Vanessa already was. "You're looking at client intake summaries," I said finally. "Transactions tied to VG lifestyle." Marcus frowned. Not defensive. Not yet. Just trying to connect what he was seeing with what he thought he understood. "That doesn't make sense," he said. "These are just allocations. Standard placements." Vanessa didn't speak. That mattered more than anything he said. Because when someone like her stays silent, it's not confusion. It's calculation. "Keep going," I said. Marcus turned another page. Then another. His breathing changed slightly. Not enough for most people to notice. But enough. "You're missing context," he said, more quickly now. "These are layered portfolios. It's how the structure works." "That's one way to describe it," I said. Vanessa looked up then. Finally. Not at Marcus. At me. "What exactly are you suggesting?" she asked. Clear. Direct. Controlled. She wasn't reacting to the documents. She was repositioning the conversation. "I'm not suggesting anything," I said. "I'm showing you what's already there." Marcus shook his head. "This is incomplete," he repeated, echoing her earlier line without realizing it. "You can't draw conclusions from this." "You're right," I said. That caught him off guard. Because agreement breaks momentum. "So let's add context," I continued. I opened my folder and slid one page forward. Not all of them. Just one. Names, clients, amounts, and the path those funds followed after they left the initial account. Marcus looked at it for a second longer than he needed to. Then he leaned back slightly. That's not how it works, he said. This time, there was something else in his voice. Not confusion. Resistance. Vanessa didn't look at the page immediately. She watched him again, measuring his reaction before choosing her own. That was her pattern. Always. What you're showing doesn't include the full structure, she said calmly. There are intermediary layers for a reason. For transparency? I asked. She didn't answer that. Instead, she shifted. You don't understand how these systems operate, she said. Not dismissive. Authoritative. That was the first time she tried to establish control in the room. Not through emotion. Through expertise. I understand them well enough, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't change tone. Because authority doesn't need volume when it has clarity. Marcus leaned forward again. This isn't illegal, he said, faster now. It's just structured differently. That's all. That's one possibility, I said. Then what are you implying? He asked. There it was. The shift from explanation to defense. I'm not implying, I said. I'm asking you to look at what happens after the initial transfer. He looked down again. This time, slower. More careful. Vanessa didn't stop him. That was the second signal. Because if she could have redirected him, she would have. But she didn't. Which meant the pattern was visible enough that interrupting it would create more questions than answers. Marcus turned another page. Then stopped. That account, he said quietly. That's not one of ours. No, I said. It's not connected to the firm. No, he looked up. Then back down. Then up again. That shouldn't be there, he said. And that was the moment everything shifted. Not dramatically. Internally. Recognition. Not full understanding yet. But enough to know something didn't align. Vanessa closed her folder again. Slower this time. More deliberate. You're taking isolated data points and building a narrative, she said. That's not how analysis works. It is when the data points repeat, I replied. Silence followed that. Not empty. Loaded. Marcus looked between us again. But this time, he wasn't looking for direction. He was looking for certainty. And certainty wasn't available anymore. What are you trying to say? He asked. His voice was quieter now. Less confident. More careful. I didn't answer immediately. Because once I said it, there was no version of this conversation that would return to what it had been before. And that's the part people don't prepare for. Not the truth itself, but what happens after it's said. I'm saying, I began, that the structure you're part of, I paused. Not for effect. For accuracy. Isn't just aggressive. Marcus didn't move. Vanessa didn't speak. It's unstable, I finished. And in that moment, the conversation stopped being about interpretation and started becoming about consequence. I didn't raise my voice after that. I didn't need to. Because once the word unstable enters a conversation like that, everything changes. Not immediately, not on the surface, but underneath it, where decisions actually get made. Marcus didn't respond right away. He stared at the page in front of him, but he wasn't reading anymore. He was trying to reconcile two versions of reality that no longer matched. Vanessa was different. She didn't look at the documents again. She looked at me. Not emotionally. Strategically. If you're going to make a claim like that, she said calmly, you should be very clear about what you mean. There it was. Control, reintroduced. Not by denying the structure. By reframing the conversation. I am being clear, I said. No, she replied. You're being suggestive. Marcus looked up again. Mom, he said quieter now. What exactly are you saying? That question mattered more than anything Vanessa said. Because for the first time, he wasn't defending the system. He was asking about it. And once someone starts asking, they're already moving away from certainty. I'm saying the flow of funds doesn't match the explanation you've been given, I said. And if it doesn't match, it gets questioned. By who? Marcus asked. Anyone who looks closely enough? I said. That wasn't an exaggeration. It was structure. Vanessa leaned back slightly. Not retreating. Repositioning. Every system has complexity, she said. That doesn't make it unstable. Complexity doesn't, I replied. Opacity does. She didn't answer that. Because that wasn't a point you could redirect easily. Marcus looked down again. Slower this time. He flipped back to the earlier pages, then forward again, like he was trying to find something he had missed the first time. That account, he said again, almost to himself. That shouldn't be there. No one corrected him. Because that realization had to come from him. That's how it holds. Vanessa shifted her focus back to him. You're looking at partial data, she said. Without context, it's misleading. Marcus didn't respond immediately. That was new. Because before, he would have agreed with her without hesitation. Now he was thinking. That was the break. Small, but real. I let the silence stay. Not to pressure him. To give him space to follow the pattern on his own. Because if I pushed too hard, he would default back to defense. And defense would put Vanessa back in control. After a few seconds, he looked up again. What happens if someone questions it, he asked. Not if it's wrong. If someone questions it, that shift matters. Then it gets reviewed, I said. And if it doesn't align? Then it escalates. He nodded once. Slowly. Not agreement. Recognition of consequence. Vanessa spoke again, but this time her tone had changed. Less authority. More precision. You're assuming escalation, she said. There's no indication of that. There are inquiries, I said. That stopped her. Not visibly, but enough. How would you know that, she asked. Because I asked, I said. Simple. Direct. No explanation of how. No need to reveal sources. Marcus looked at her. Not at me. That was the moment everything shifted again. Because now, he wasn't looking for answers from me. He was looking for confirmation from her. And she didn't give it. Not immediately. Which meant she couldn't. That doesn't mean anything formal, she said after a moment. Preliminary questions happen all the time. Marcus didn't relax. He stayed where he was. Between two explanations. One familiar. One new. And neither fully stable anymore. I opened my folder again. Not to add pressure. To complete the structure. There's one more thing, I said. They both looked at me. Same moment. Different reasons. Marcus was looking for clarity. Vanessa was looking for risk. The timing, I said. What about it? Marcus asked. The way everything accelerated. I continued. Your income. Your retirement. The expansion. That's growth, he said. It's speed, I replied. And speed without foundation. I let the sentence finish itself in his head. Because some conclusions are stronger when they're not spoken. Vanessa didn't interrupt this time. She didn't redirect. She didn't correct. Which meant the structure I had laid out was doing what it was supposed to do. Not convincing them. Exposing the gaps they couldn't fill. Marcus leaned back slowly. Not defeated, but no longer certain. And that was the only position where the next part would matter. Because until someone lets go of certainty, they won't see what's actually in front of them. I didn't move to the next point immediately. Not because I needed time. Because Marcus did. Once someone starts questioning something they used to trust, you don't rush them. You let the structure settle. Otherwise, they reach for the easiest explanation and go right back to where they were. Vanessa didn't interrupt the silence this time. That was new. Up until now, she had controlled the pace. Redirected when necessary. Filled gaps before they became problems. Now she was waiting. Not because she wanted to. Because she needed to understand how much I already knew. That's the moment control shifts. Not when someone raises their voice. When the other person starts measuring what you might say next. Marcus leaned forward again. Slower this time. What are you asking me to do, he said. That question matters. Because it means he's no longer defending the system. He's looking for a way out of it. I'm not asking you to do anything yet, I said. Vanessa's eyes moved slightly at that. Not relief. Calculation. Then why are we here, she asked. Clear. Controlled. Still trying to define the frame. Because timing matters, I said. Marcus frowned slightly. Timing for what? For when this stops being something you can manage privately, I replied. Silence again. He looked down at the folder. Then back at me. You said there are inquiries, he said. What does that actually mean? It means someone already saw enough to ask questions, I said. And once questions start, they don't stay isolated. Vanessa leaned in slightly. That's not how regulatory processes work, she said. It is when the pattern is consistent, I replied. She held my gaze. Not pushing, not agreeing, just holding it. Trying to determine whether I was speculating or speaking from structure. Marcus spoke again. If this escalates, he began, then stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Because he already understood the direction it was going. That depends on what happens next, I said. With what, he asked. With the structure you're part of, I replied. Vanessa shifted her posture. Not outwardly defensive, but more contained. That structure isn't going to collapse because of a few questions, she said. I didn't say collapse, I replied. I said exposure. That landed differently. Because collapse is internal. Exposure is external. And external pressure is what systems like this are built to avoid. Marcus looked at her again, still searching for confirmation, still expecting alignment. You said everything was compliant, he said. Her response came quickly. It is, within the model we're using. Within the model. That phrasing matters. Because it doesn't mean legal. It means structured. And those aren't the same thing. I didn't interrupt. Because this part needed to happen between them. Not through me. Marcus exhaled slowly. Then he looked back at the documents. Longer this time. More carefully. That's when the second shift happened. Not doubt. Distance. He was no longer inside the system completely. He was looking at it. From just far enough away to see that it wasn't as stable as he thought. What happens if someone pulls out, he asked. Vanessa answered first. They won't, she said. The structure is designed to retain. What happens if they do? He repeated. That interruption was new. Small, but significant. Vanessa paused. Not long, but long enough. It would create pressure, she said. How much? Manageable, she replied. I didn't correct her. Because the question wasn't about numbers. It was about acknowledgement. Marcus nodded once, then leaned back. Okay, he said quietly. Not agreement. Acceptance of uncertainty. And that's where decisions start to change. I reached into my folder again. Not to add more information. To change the direction. Before you decide what to do about any of this, I said, there's something you need to understand. They both looked up. Same moment. Different expectations. Marcus was looking for clarity. Vanessa was looking for leverage. This isn't just about the company, I continued. Marcus frowned slightly. What do you mean? It means what you're connected to, I said, choosing the words carefully, can extend beyond what you think you control. Vanessa's expression didn't change, but her attention sharpened. Be specific, she said. I will, I replied. Because at that point, the conversation was no longer about whether something was wrong. It was about how far it could reach, and whether they were prepared for what that actually meant. I didn't rush the next part. Not because I was hesitating. Because once you shift a conversation from something is wrong to this could spread, every word starts carrying weight it didn't have before. Marcus was already there. You could see it in how still he had become. Not frozen. Focused. Vanessa was different. She leaned forward slightly, hands resting on the table, posture controlled, eyes steady. Be specific, she repeated. That wasn't a request. It was a boundary. She was trying to define how far this conversation could go. I didn't respond to the tone. I responded to the structure. You asked what happens if this escalates, I said. So let's answer that properly. Marcus nodded once. Vanessa didn't move. If a review expands, I continued, it doesn't stop at transactions. It looks at relationships, ownership, timing. Marcus frowned. Timing, he asked. Yes, I said. When assets move, when control shifts, what happens before and after certain decisions are made. Vanessa's fingers tightened slightly against the table. Not visibly enough for most people to notice, but enough. You're making assumptions, she said. I'm outlining process, I replied. That distinction matters. Assumptions can be argued. Processes can't. Marcus looked down again. Okay, but how does that affect me? He asked. That question told me exactly where he still was. Inside the situation, but not fully. Aware of how wide it could become. It affects anything connected to your name, I said. He didn't answer immediately, because that forced him to think beyond the company. His accounts, his assets, anything that had changed recently. Vanessa spoke before he could. There's nothing irregular about his holdings, she said. Everything is structured appropriately. I looked at her. Not challenging, just steady. That depends on timing, I said again. Marcus's attention shifted back to me. What are you getting at? I reached into my folder and pulled out one document. Not a stack. One. I placed it on the table between us. Centered. Deliberate. Marcus recognized the layout immediately. That's, he started, then stopped. Vanessa's eyes moved to it, then back to me. Faster this time. What is that? She asked. A transfer agreement, I said. Marcus's expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough to register recognition. From when? He asked. From the night of your party, I replied. Silence. Not confused. Focused. Vanessa reached for the document first. Of course she did. She didn't skim it this time. She read it, line by line, carefully. Marcus leaned closer. What is it? He asked again. Vanessa didn't answer right away. That was the first real break in her pattern. Because before, She always filled the gap immediately. Now she was calculating. Finally, she spoke. It's a property transfer, she said. To him, I added. Marcus looked at me. To me? Yes. How much? I didn't answer immediately. Not for effect. For accuracy. 2.1 million, I said. That landed. You could see it. Not excitement. Not relief. Disruption. Because the number didn't match the version of me they had built over the years. Marcus leaned back slowly. That doesn't make sense, he said. It doesn't fit what you assumed, I replied. Vanessa closed the document. Carefully. Too carefully. Why are you showing this now, she asked. That was the right question. Not about the amount. About the timing. Because it matters when something moves, I said. Marcus looked between us again. What do you mean? It means if that transfer had gone through, I continued, it would now be attached to your name. He didn't respond. Not yet. And if a review expands, I let the sentence sit for a second. Anything attached to your name gets looked at. Vanessa's posture changed again. Subtle. Contained. You're implying that this would put him at risk, she said. I'm stating that it would expose him to it, I replied. Marcus exhaled slowly, then looked down at the document again. Longer this time. More carefully. You didn't give this to me, he said quietly. No, I said. Why? Because that was the point. The one that connected everything. The moment you pushed that envelope back, I said, you stopped this from becoming part of your structure. Silence. Real silence this time. Not controlled. Not managed. Just there. Because in that moment, he understood something he hadn't seen before. He didn't lose a gift. He avoided a connection. And for the first time since this started, the conversation wasn't about defending what he had built. It was about realizing how close it came to collapsing around him. I didn't add anything after that. I didn't need to. Because once Marcus understood that he hadn't just rejected a gift, he had avoided attaching something clean to something unstable. The conversation stopped being theoretical. It became real. He stayed quiet longer than before. Not frozen. Not confused. Processing. That's what it looks like when someone realizes the structure they trusted doesn't protect them the way they thought it did. Vanessa was still, composed on the surface. But there was a shift. Not in what she said. In what she didn't. She didn't correct him. She didn't reframe the situation. She didn't redirect the conversation back to incomplete data. That silence mattered. Because it meant she understood exactly what had just been revealed. Not the amount. The implication. Marcus finally looked up. You knew, he said. Not a question. A realization. I met his eyes. Yes. That was enough. He nodded once. Slowly. Not agreement. Acceptance of the fact that this wasn't something that had just appeared. It had been building. And I had seen it before he did. Vanessa leaned back slightly, exhaling in a controlled way. So what now, she asked. There it was. Not denial. Not defense. Transition. From control to damage management. That depends on you, I said. Marcus frowned slightly. On me? Yes, I replied. Because at this point, nothing I said would matter more than what he chose to do next. If this continues the way it's structured now, I continued, it won't stay contained. Vanessa didn't interrupt. She was listening now, not to respond, to evaluate risk. And if it doesn't stay contained, I said, it won't be just the company that gets reviewed. Marcus leaned forward again. What are my options? He asked. That question matters more than any explanation, because it means someone has moved past defending and is now looking for a way out. You have 3, I said. I didn't rush through them. Clarity matters more than speed here. First, I said, you do nothing. You assume it holds. You continue exactly as you are. He didn't respond, because he already understood what that meant. Second, I continued, you step back. You remove your name from anything you can before this becomes formal. Vanessa's eyes shifted slightly at that. Not disagreement. Awareness of consequence. Third, I said, you go deeper. You find out exactly what you're part of before someone else does it for you. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was directional. Marcus looked down at the table, then back at the folder, then at Vanessa. For the first time since this started, he didn't look at her for confirmation. He looked at her for truth. And she didn't give it to him. Not directly. We need more information, she said. Careful. Measured. No longer certain. Marcus nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. We do. That was the second shift. Small. But final. He wasn't following her lead anymore. He was thinking independently. And once that happens, control changes. I closed my folder. Not abruptly, just enough to signal that the part of the conversation I needed to control was over. What you do next is your decision, I said. Marcus looked at me. You're not going to tell me? He asked. No, I said, because telling him would put me back in control. And this wasn't about control anymore. It was about responsibility. Vanessa stood first. Not rushed, not reactive, but the movement itself was a signal. She was leaving the room where she no longer defined the structure. Marcus stayed seated for a moment longer, then stood as well. Slower, more deliberate. As they moved toward the door, he paused. Just for a second. You didn't give me the property, he said. No, I replied. He nodded once. I understand why now. That was the first time he said something without uncertainty attached to it. And that mattered more than anything else in that room. Because understanding comes before change. And change was the only thing that could still alter what happened next. Before I close this, I want you to think about one thing. If someone had already decided who you were, would you try to change their mind, or would you change what they have access to? Because that's the decision everything else came down to. After that meeting, I didn't follow up immediately. I didn't call Marcus. I didn't ask what he decided. I didn't check whether Vanessa stayed or stepped away. Because once someone sees a structure clearly, they don't need you to repeat it. They need to decide whether they're willing to stay inside it. A week passed before I heard from him again. Not a long message. Not emotional. Just one line. I stepped back. That was all. No explanation. No defense. No attempt to justify what had happened before. Just action. That told me everything I needed to know. Because stepping back isn't easy when you've built your identity around something. It means accepting that what you trusted might not have been stable to begin with. Over the next few weeks, things adjusted. Quietly, VG Lifestyle stopped onboarding new clients. Internal changes were made. Names were removed from places they had been before. Not public, not dramatic, but real. Vanessa was no longer involved in the same way. I didn't ask what that meant. I didn't need to. Because people don't step away from control unless the structure supporting it is no longer secure. Marcus reached out again after a month. This time, he came alone. No Vanessa. No presentation. Just him. We didn't sit in the main office. We sat in the smaller room near the back. Less formal. Less distance. I should have read it, he said. He didn't specify what. He didn't need to. The envelope, I said. He nodded. And everything else, he added. That mattered more. Because this was no longer about a single moment. It was about the pattern that led to it. I didn't correct him. I didn't say, I told you. Because that doesn't change anything. I wasn't paying attention to the right things, he said. That happens, I replied. Not to minimize it. To keep it accurate. Because mistakes don't come from a lack of intelligence. They come from misplaced focus. He sat there for a moment. Then looked at me. What would you have done, he asked. That question always comes after clarity. Not before. I wouldn't have built something I didn't fully understand, I said. He nodded slowly. Not defensive. Not resistant. Just processing. And the property? He asked after a moment. I looked at him. Not evaluating. Just steady. It's not about giving it back, I said. Then what is it about? It's about making sure what you build next doesn't depend on something you can't control. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was clear. 6 months later, Finmore wasn't in my name anymore. But it wasn't in his either. I transferred it to New Ground, a training center for young people who didn't have access to the kind of structure most take for granted. Stable income, clear ownership, no hidden layers. The kind of foundation I spent decades building, used for something that wouldn't collapse under pressure. Marcus visited once after that, not to ask for anything, just to see it. He walked through the building slowly, different from how he used to move through spaces. Less certain, more aware. That's what it looks like when it's built right, I told him. He didn't respond right away. Then he nodded. I see that now, he said. And that was enough. Because this was never about the money. It wasn't about the envelope. It wasn't even about being dismissed in that room. It was about something much simpler. Knowing what you're part of before it decides what happens to you. So I'll ask you again. If you were in my position, would you have tried to prove them wrong? Or would you have stepped back and changed the outcome instead? Because sometimes, the strongest move isn't correcting how people see you. It's making sure their assumptions no longer affect your future.